Welcome to my channel. My name is Jack. Before you start watching this story, please support my channel. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell. You have to admit that death can sometimes be around every corner, that no one can ever predict where this meeting will take place, in a warm home, or on a dark and deserted street, or maybe, which certainly seems unlikely to many of you, even during a family dinner. However, there are exceptions to every story. Kenny Ong's story is just such a story. Is this really possible, you ask? How could a simple family dinner end in a brutal murder that will shock all Malaysians, and the local authorities will even review the current legislation? Let's take a look at this case. Full name of the heroine, Kenny Ong Lake Yang. She was born in 1974 in the Malaysian city of Ipoh, in a large family. And even though the city is considered a rather remarkable place for tourists, but Kenny herself dreamed of something else, a prestigious job, traveling, and what else could a young woman dream of? Of course, all this couldn't just fall from the sky. She had to strive for her dream, and she understood that. First, Kenny graduated from high school with a gold medal, then went to university in Hawaii, where she even got a degree in economics. The beginning was made, and it was necessary to develop further, and she, being already independent, went to Los Angeles, where she got a job in an advertising agency. The City of Dreams gave the young girl self-realization as a specialist in her field. It was there in 2001 that Kenny met Brandon Ong, who, just like her father, was born in Singapore, but left there with his family to America as a child and was now rightfully considered an American. Young Kenny and Brandon got married pretty quickly and moved to the neighboring city of San Diego. But only 2 years into their life together, there was an accident. Kenny's father fell ill with liver cancer. Her father was going to have a serious surgery in Malaysia, and it was not quite clear whether he would survive after such an operation or not. So Kenny quickly packed her things, and on June 1st, leaving her husband in America, flew to her father. Fortunately, the operation was successful. The disease receded. The doctors assured that B-Gen, as Kenny's father was called, would live for a long time and would surely wait for grandchildren. Kenny exhaled with relief. Finally, it was safe to return to her beloved husband and her favorite job. She took a morning flight to Los Angeles, and in the evening, Kenny invited her extended family to a farewell dinner at their favorite restaurant called Monty's, where they had gone on holidays when Kenny still lived with her parents. During dinner, Kenny's mom suddenly didn't feel well, and her caring daughter offered to drive her home. In the parking lot, she looked for a parking ticket in her purse for a long time, and when she couldn't find it, she decided that she had simply forgotten it in the interior of the car. So Kenny asked her sisters to watch her mother and ran to the car. She was gone for a long time. Her mother even decided to go to the car herself, but Kenny's car was not there, and neither was her daughter's. Then one of the sisters started to call Kenny's phone, but it, even more alarmingly, turned out to be switched off. The family knew Kenny very well. She couldn't afford to just disappear, and even if something had happened, she was sure to call and warn her family. But what could have happened in a closed parking lot, literally 300 feet from her family? Kenny's father went to the security guards and asked them to show the security footage. At first, there was nothing strange. His daughter walking toward the car, checking her pockets, looking in her purse for her keys. But then they noticed that behind Kenny there was a stranger moving behind him, and like Kenny, he was slowing down and speeding up. Already from another camera, the guards together with the worried father watched Kenny's car leaving the parking lot. But behind the wheel was a man, most likely the one who followed her in the parking lot, but Kenny herself, strangely enough, was sitting in the passenger seat. It all looked like a kidnapping, and the family immediately called the police. It should be given credit. The Malaysian police began the search for the missing woman as soon as they received information on the stolen car, and in a couple of hours, one of the highway patrol noticed a car on the road, which matched the description. In order not to frighten the possible perpetrator, and at the time, they did not fully understand whether it was a kidnapping or not, the police patrol stopped the car to check the documents. The car stopped. The driver was visibly nervous, but still with a smile gave the policeman his license, and Kenny, who was sitting next to him, tried to give the policeman some signs, but he was checking the driver's documents. Unfortunately, he did not understand it, but the kidnapper paid attention to it, and he pressed the gas pedal to the floor and drove away from the patrol car. The police tried to shoot at the trail, but to no avail. The car fled, but they still had the documents of the kidnapper, 27-year-old Ahmad Najib bin Aris. Let me tell you a brief biography of this guy. Ahmad was born in 1976 and grew up in Muar, Malaysia. He was the second of 4 siblings in the family. Ahmad Najib studied until the 3rd year of secondary school before dropping out, not continuing the last 2 years of secondary education. Secondary education in Malaysia lasts 5 years because he had to work to feed his family and was a hard worker. In 1998, he came from Muar to Kuala Lumpur. Later, Ahmad Najib was married and had 2 children. According to people who knew him, Ahmad Najib was a man of good character and responsible in his work. And now back to our case. After a while, it turned out that the shooting at the car did not go without result. A young man approached the police and told a strange story. He said that during dinner at a roadside cafe, an unknown guy approached him and said that he was going on vacation with his wife. But on the road, he punctured a tire, and now they could not go further. The young man gladly decided to help the stranger. They went outside. He took a jack out of the trunk, gave it to the traveler, but he noticed bullet marks on the car, and on the front seat, he saw a frightened woman, hardly looking like a wife going on a carefree vacation with her beloved husband. The so-called husband himself did not change the tire, but only fiddled with the jack for a while, grumbled, and gave it back. The police immediately realized that it was Kenny and her kidnapper was Ahmad. However, that was the last time Kenny was seen alive. Kenny Ong, or rather her body, would be found only 3 days later in a sewer manhole near a construction site, almost burned to the ground. As the autopsy will show, the woman was first stabbed in the stomach several times and later strangled. Also, not far from the construction site, will be found in Kenny's car, with a punctured or rather shot tire and with bloodstains on the back seat. The police, who had the killer's documents in their possession, for some reason decided to go to the address where Ahmad lived only after the body was found. The amazing thing about this story is that the killer was at home and living a very ordinary life, as if nothing had happened, as if he had not stolen someone else's car, as if he had not kidnapped a woman who had come to visit her father during his illness, and finally, as if he had not driven away from the police officers who were shooting at him. Later, after Ahmad's arrest, forensic tests would prove that in addition to Kenny's blood, Ahmad's own DNA was in the car. We would like to clarify that in Malaysia, murders, especially such brutal ones, are extremely rare. The point is that according to the criminal code, a murderer is entitled to the highest punishment, not even life imprisonment, but the death penalty. It is unclear what Ahmad hoped for, knowing that the police have all the data on him, but he confessed everything and even decided to help the investigation, counting on the fact that it will save him from death. Naturally, the brutal criminal put on the mask of an innocent sheep. At the trial, he said that that night in the parking lot, he was looking for a completely different woman, but mistaken, and realized it only when he was riding with Kenny in the car. According to him, they even laughed together about the situation, and later he tried to get her to have sex with him, and again, according to him, Kenny was not even against it, and the strangulation marks on her neck were just part of the woman's sexual fantasy, which is why she died. A terrified Ahmad decided to dispose of the body and set Kenny on fire. This story was made up from start to finish by Ahmad's lawyers, because in such a case he would have been awarded only abuse of the deceased, or at worst negligent homicide, given that Kenny had asked to be strangled herself during the intimate encounter. And supposedly, if this is not true, if all this is just a fantasy of the defendant, then why the captive did not run away while her captor was changing the tire, the lawyers said. Such a version could sound even convincing if it were not for the stab wounds in the abdomen. It was at this point that the whole defense fell apart like a house of cards. It was obvious, because the investigation had a different, more reliable, autopsy-confirmed view of what had happened. Ahmad saw a lone woman in the parking lot outside Monty's restaurant and followed her. When Kenny opened her car, he threatened her with a knife, ordered her into the passenger seat, and got behind the wheel himself. After that encounter with police officers and a failed attempt to replace a blown tire, he drove the car to a deserted location, put a terrified Kenny in the back seat, and used her several times. Kenny tried to resist, for which she was stabbed several times in the stomach and later strangled with a coat belt. After the abuse, Ahmad took her already dead body outside and threw it into the first manhole, covering it with tires so that it would not be found. He returned to this manhole the next day with several canisters of gasoline and decided to finally hide the traces of the crime, filled Kenny's body with gasoline, and set it on fire. In addition, as it turned out later, Ahmad had 4 rapes against women who fortunately did not die, but still fearing conviction, did not file a police report. Finally, on February 23, 2005, the court, for some reason lasting for several years, finally sentenced the murderer and, among other things, gave Ahmad 10 lashes. But did this make it any easier for the parents who had lost their daughter forever? Being behind bars, Ahmad tried to appeal his sentence and even wrote a letter to Selangor, the head of state, asking him to pardon him, but of course he was refused. And only 13 years after Kenny's murder, Ahmad got what he deserved. On September 23, 2016, he was hanged right in his cell. As I said, this case was quite high profile in Malaysia. Residents were frightened not so much by the brutality of the murder itself, and Ahmad's seemingly empty belief in his impunity, but by the fact that it is not so difficult to kidnap a person in a crowded shopping center, albeit in a parking lot. To prevent this from happening again, the Malaysian authorities began to install as many CCTV cameras as possible around the country, increased the number of security guards in shopping centers, and even made parking spaces specifically for women. And in all this situation, it is very pathetic that for such measures it was necessary to sacrifice the life of an innocent woman who flew to her father for 2 weeks from tens of thousands of miles away. Thanks for watching, guys. Jack was with you again. Subscribe to the channel. There are many shocking stories ahead.